From Boston, Crockett's Victory Garden.
Welcome to Crockett's Victory Garden. I'm Jim Crockett. The first plant I want to talk to you about today is this enormous cauliflower called early purple head. Now, I don't see why they called it early, because I had to plant the seeds in May to get them up not quite to fruiting season yet. But I do want you to see what's happening down inside of these plants. Here we see the head beginning to form. It is now about 4 or 5 inches across. Eventually, it'll be as big as a basketball and light purple in color. Now, when it's cooked, it turns back to pale green, a very, very delightful vegetable. 2 or 3 things in its favor. One, you don't have to blanch it. You don't have to pull the leaves together like this over the top of it, because the head, or the curd so-called, will be tender without that having been done. But you very, very seldom find this in commercial gardens because of that very long growing season that it demands. A great variety for the home garden called early purple head. Well, now today is the day that we're going to divide some rhubarb. We're going to divide some old horseradish and show you how to plant that. Then we're going in the greenhouse and revitalize a couple of ancient Amaryllises. And then in our plant clinic, we have a Boston fern that really looks the worst for wear. Well, the first thing I want to talk to you about are cabbages, because we have a problem here in our cabbage patch that you should see. If you look right at the top of this cabbage head, you'll see that it's split wide open. Now, this happens when a cabbage is completely mature but is not harvested and the rains come. Because when you get a lot of rain, a lot of water, these plants are taking up water faster than they can lose it. There's something like a balloon bursting with all of that turgidity within. Now, what you do is when you find cabbages that are mature, now this is a small but a very firm-headed variety called stonehead, very, very hard. That cabbage is ready for picking. If I don't want to pick it, then what I do have to do is to keep it from bursting. I use a spade and just cut around the plant like this, and lift it partially out of the soil. You can tip it over to one side like that if you want to. What you will have done by so doing is to break off a lot of the roots. Now, not all of them, because there are enough roots left that this plant can still get enough moisture to stay fresh, but not so much that it will burst open. So that's the way you treat cabbages to keep them from splitting. Now, the next thing we're going to talk about today are potatoes, and we're going to dig some potatoes. But before we dig them, I want to answer another question that we get frequently about potatoes. And that refers to these little seeds that you sometimes find on top of a potato plant. They used to be called potato balls. They are not good eating. They are related to tomatoes, but I want to repeat, they are not edible. If you cut one of these in half like that, you will find the little segments, just as you find the segments in tomatoes. Now, to a plant breeder, these are very important, because this is how you get the new varieties of potatoes. They have to be grown from seed. A couple of years ago, I was in the U.S. Department of Agriculture experimental station at Beltsville, Maryland. They had literally thousands and thousands of young potato plants grown from seed. They would grow them on, test them to see if they could find, for example, one that could be made into potato chips that would preserve that nice golden color without turning black. But the home gardener is not interested in these. What he's interested in is buying good certified seed potatoes, cutting those into pieces so that when he plants them, he knows what his crop is going to be. Well, I know we're going to get some potatoes under here. I don't know how good they're going to be. It's always a little treasure hunt. First of all, look for the stems. When they turn brown like that, you know it's time to harvest the potatoes. Now, you take these old stems away. Remember, when you start to dig, that those potatoes may not all be right here in the middle. They could very well be out here on the sides as well. Now, I will say, would qualify this a bit by saying there's been really a time that I have dug potatoes without sticking my fork into some of them. But I want to be somewhat cautious in digging so that you, at least there's a minimum of that kind of damage. There we're getting some. This is the variety, let me see, this variety is called Russet Sebago. A very nice variety, a good winter potato. Try to get down deeply. Now this is the kind of thing that I like to see, uniformity. Most of them are a fairly even size, not too big. One of my son's neighbors up in Nova Scotia the other day dug a potato that weighed 3.5 pounds, and kind of wondered if they put it in the oven alongside the turkey, because it's really pretty big to handle. Here we're getting some more nice ones. Now on your potatoes, remember that if you do stick your fork into some of them, those are the ones to eat first, because they won't keep if the skin has been scarred. Let them dry in the sun for a couple of hours. Put them in the darkness, because if you don't put them in the darkness, the foliage, the skin will turn green, and green potatoes are not good to eat. Now we're going to talk about rhubarb. This particular clump of rhubarb is one which was a small plant this time last year, small division. I planted it in rich soil in the perennial garden, and I want you to see this enormous root growth in these great big stalks still here late in the fall. Shows what good soil will do for rhubarb. Now, all there is to do in dividing rhubarb is to take a spade, try to follow, if you can, somewhat the natural contours of the roots. Let me see what we get out of here. There's a good one. Slice it off just like that. Now this has, I'm going to cut off the whole tops of these two, because this part is not important to us. What we're looking for here is a section such as this, which has down in here some of the latent buds which will be coming next year. This is a good division, even larger than what you might get if you buy them from a nursery. If you buy them from the nursery, there won't be any stems at all. There'll be just little nubs, which are the underground buds. When you plant them so that those little buds are about 1 inch beneath the surface. Now we're going to go into the secret of growing good rhubarb. As far as I'm concerned, the secret is compost. We'll just throw some compost in and mix some soil with it, like so. And we're ready to put this plant in the ground. Now, I should say that you want to set rhubarb such as I have here, which has been growing in the garden, at the very same depth at which it grew previously. If I were to peel that completely aside, you would find some little buds down in there, and those are the ones which would be about 1 inch under the ground. Now we want to bring that up to just about the soil level, like so. Tramp around it with your feet. Give that a drink of water, and that plant, it would be ready to grow. Now, remember that your rhubarb plants may not have to be divided, but every 4 or 5 years. But if they do start to run out and you get those little tiny skinny stems on them, divide them, add some compost or some manure to the soil, and replant them. Now we have some horseradish. And I want to show you an old plant of horseradish, one which, as you can judge by all of the sod growing around it, was dug out of a field. Eventually get this apart and we'll find the root. This is about as hardy, as tough a plant as you're going to find in the vegetable line, and is one which, however tough it is and able to withstand all kinds of adverse conditions, it does so much better when it's given just some kind of a break. Now here we have a typical horseradish plant. This great big root here is the root which is the edible portion of it. Now we can take something like that, wash it off a little bit, begin to get some of the clean color. Now on the inside is the white horseradish. Now this is the part that you grate. By the way, if you're trying to to use horseradish and have it keep its color, grate this into white wine vinegar. Don't use cider vinegar or it will all turn brown. Now I'm going to divide this plant into some pieces that we could set out for another year. Well, let's begin with a section such as this, where we have a piece of the old crown. Now this part up here at the top would not be, there's nothing up in there to eat anyway, so we'll cut off this side root, these little fellas. We have here a very good division. That one already has a crown, will begin to grow without any trouble. Now down here was that piece which I just cut off from there, as you see. Now this is the top of it, and I'm going to perform a very simple operation used by gardeners for generations to help them remember which is the top of a root and which is the bottom. If you cut the top off with a square cut like that, remember that that's the top, then you can cut the root itself, the bottom on the slanting cut. Now you know that this is always the top and the others are the bottom, and this is the top. Now we can come right back to this at that cut and square that one off again like that, and we can cut the bottom at an angle. Now I can drop those on the ground, and there's no question when I go to pick them up which is going to be top and bottom, because those parts which are cut squarely across will be the top. Now in planting them, get a lot of compost or manure into the soil. If possible, have a soil that is deep, something that will go down for 8 to 10 inches if you can, and dig it over and enrich it. And then at this time of year, in November, which is the harvest and replanting season for horseradish, you take these little roots, put them in the ground. I'm going to dig a rather strange hole here just to show you. You lay them in the ground at an angle about 45 degrees, like that, and then cover them up. Be sure that the top part is up. Cover them over about 1 inch. Now next spring, when they get about so tall, what you want to do is to go dig down around the plant. You'll find there's a bunch of little side roots coming off. Peel those off gently, and this root will grow to be a great big fat one for harvest next fall. Now we're going to go over and talk about some tomatoes, because you know what happens this time of year. Frost has either arrived or is threatened, and there's still a lot of green tomatoes in the garden. Well, what do you do with green tomatoes? I know what people have done for a long time. They'll take tomatoes like this, put them out on their windowsill, and pray that they'll turn red. Well, if they stay there long enough, they will turn red. They'll turn just as bitter as can be, even worse than the ones you get in the store. What's more, they'll shrivel. But the secret is this. If you will take green tomatoes like this and put them in something like this old hamper, put them in and put in a ripe apple along with them, that is the real secret, because this apple will give off ethylene gas. The ethylene gas will turn the tomatoes red. They won't shrink or shrivel. They will have as good flavor as you could possibly expect. Not as good as fresh ripened, but you know, from this time of the season on, we're not going to have much of an alternative. Keep them in the dark and keep a ripe apple with them. Now let's go into the greenhouse. I'm going to talk to you about some calla lilies. I should say first of all that a calla lily is a native of South Africa. They grow in the ditches there beside the road where there's an awful lot of moisture. And I understand that the pigs get out there and root around in the ditches and dig up all of these roots to eat. Now this is a calla lily. This, by the way, is the way it's spelled. C-A-L-L-A-L-I-L-Y, calla lily. The blossom of this particular plant looks as though you've taken a large piece of white paper, creamy white paper, and rolled it into a sort of an ice cream cone shape and rolled the edges, the top edges. Extremely fragrant, snowy white flower, one that you should grow indoors. Now this is an old plant kept over from last year. I'm going to tap this out of the pot, clean it up a little bit, because this is, let me show you approximately what it is that you would buy if you were buying one, if you sent away to, or got these at a garden center or through the mail. What you would get would be this part of it below the stem. You'd get this kind of a fat root without all of these nice feeding roots from it. But this one is still a growing plant and can be kept growing year-round in the house. What you want to do, or outdoors in the summer if you want to, but the chief thing is that we want to have sunshine, a fertile soil, and a great deal of water. Now we can put this into a flower pot here. I'm going to put a little gravel in the bottom just for drainage. I'm going to start with some potting soil here. Work that fellow right down in around and fill in around it. Now this plant, you see, is getting a new lease on life and will become a beautiful plant. Then let me review it again. Bright sunshine, warm temperatures, and a lot of food, and then be sure that you set this in a saucer of water, and this is one of the few plants that I know of that you grow in the house where you should always have standing water underneath it. That's the way to grow your calla lily. Okay, now the next plant that we're going to talk about today is an amaryllis. And first of all, I'm going to refresh your memory of what an amaryllis looks like. There are two different varieties of colors of amaryllis. As you see, the flowers are lily-like. They come in white, pink, orange, or various shades of red. Often a single stalk, which by the way has no leaves on the stalk, will carry 4 or more blossoms, each of which are 8 or 9 inches across. They are really tremendous flowers. They're not cheap, but they do last for many, many years. And I'm going to show you right here one, which looks pretty bedraggled, but this is a plant which blossomed last year. Now again, let's give you the name of that is the Amaryllis. A-M-A-R-Y-L-L-I-S, a South African bulb. This pot, as you see, has broken. So we're going to have to give this plant a new pot. But I am not going to give it a larger pot. And I guess maybe that's the real key to what I want to say here. I'm going to put this amaryllis in another pot of exactly the same size. But before we do that, I want to talk about this foliage. Now, during the summertime, this foliage came up like this and had this beautiful arch to it. And now, of course, you see it. It's lost all of its vigor. Most of the old leaves have died right off. And we can cut these others back like that. Now, that gets them out of the way. We're going to take this plant and reset it into another pot of the same size instead of a larger pot. When we take this out, I guess the thing I want to show you here is look at that great root system, just wound round and round. This plant is peculiar in that it shouldn't be repotted often than every 3rd year. Ordinarily, you'd say when a plant is pot bound like that to repot it. Now, this is an exception to the rule. This will go right into this flower pot like so. Now we come to the trick of what you do instead of repotting it. You get your hose like that, and you just wash away some of that excess soil. Get some of this right out of the way. Just wash it away. You see there's a minimum of disturbance to the roots, like so. Then we'll put some fresh soil around it. Now, the trick comes in putting this fresh soil is to firm it very, very well. Better firm it with a stick such as this rather than with just your thumbs. You can't put it in quite firmly enough that way. Pound it down quite firmly so that eventually 2/3 of the bulb is above the soil and 1/3 is beneath the soil. Now we come to our plant clinic. And of course, this is exactly the way you plant a brand new amaryllis bulb such as this one, which you see has a very poor root system, but nevertheless, would go in just as we've done the other. Now we come to the plant clinic, and I have here an enormous fern. This is a Boston fern, which has truly seen better days. I must tell you that there's something been wrong with this plant since the time we got it. This plant is a mate to this one right down here at the back end of the greenhouse, which is somewhere between 3.5 and 4 feet across. That one has always grown well. This one has not grown well, and I'm going to find out why. What we're going to do is to take this plant apart and get to the root system and see what's going on down in there. Get rid of this big pot. Now, this is what we find. A ball of soil. You can see how hard that is. Absolutely solid roots. Well, that means that the plant has exhausted its possibilities. But down here, still trying to grow, some potential fronds. Now, this is the type of thing which I'm going to save by taking a knife and cutting a segment out of that. Now, this is a tough thing to get through, but you can finally whack your way down through these. Now this, I'm going to show you the results. It seems that everything's fallen apart here from this process, but we will eventually get this piece of frond out of there. Very tough roots. I say tough, and I really mean it this time. This seems to be a harsh treatment for the plant, but I'm going to show you in a minute a plant that had similar treatment and how good it looks today. Well, I didn't expect such a struggle out of this thing, but here it is. Okay, eventually. Right now we have a plant which looks as though it might be a fern, but the next thing is to cut off all of those fronds like that. Now we have what apparently is almost nothing, yet this we shall begin by putting some drainage in the bottom like that, adding some potting soil. We'll set this little fellow so that it is just about at the soil level where it grew previously. Firm it down quite well with your fingers. Now I'm going to give this plant about 6 months, and I'll show you what it will look like. This plant right here was identical to this one 6 months ago. So you see there is a good salvation to it. Now if you look up over my head here, you'll see another one. This one is about a year old from a little division such as that. Absolutely beautiful houseplant. What do they like? First of all, don't brush them, because brushing them injures the fronds and they'll turn brown on the edges. They like moisture, but also good drainage. It's a strange combination. And of course, they like partial shade, as any fern would do. Well, now we come to a few questions today. The first one is from Chicago. Please explain how to grow dill. Can I grow it indoors in a pot? Well, yes, you can. It does quite well on a sunny window. Now you see a little dill plant here that you could grow up on a sunny windowsill, and you can pick these leaves during the winter months. Of course, it does beautifully in the garden in the summertime. Second question is from Montreal. We have a honeysuckle hedge about 50 feet long that looks normal and healthy every spring. But come August, the leaves cover with mildew, and by September the hedge is ruined. Would you please have a remedy? Yes, the remedy is a fungicide. I would use benlate or carathane. Both of those are good fungicides which should be applied about every 10 days beginning about the 1st of August, and I think your foliage will stay green all through the fall next year. From Duluth, Minnesota, can an amateur do-it-yourselfer transplant a small clump of 3 birches 6 to 8 feet tall? When? Spring or fall? Well, yes, you can do it. You should do it in the spring rather than the fall, and be sure to take a good clump of soil with it and then thin out some of those branches on the trees themselves, because you will have lost an awful lot of roots. You've got to compensate by taking off some of the top as well. From Maine, this fall I dug up large clumps of jonquil bulbs. Should I put back the largest bulbs only? No, of course you plant all of them. The larger ones are large enough to blossom now for next spring. The smaller ones, if I were you, I would plant out in very rich soil in my vegetable garden. Just line them out as though they were onions. They will grow and become larger bulbs to blossom another year. From Brooklyn, New York, I have a split-leaf philodendron that just won't split. What am I doing wrong? Well, we have a so-called split-leaf philodendron. Let me tell you, first of all, it's not a philodendron. It's called a monstera. When it's young, the leaves don't have the splits. As they get older, they do split like this mature one. Your plant isn't old enough. When it gets a little bit older, the leaves will begin to separate like that. Well, that's all we have time for this week. Next week, we're going to plant some bulbs in pots for forcing next winter, and we're going to build a cold frame. I'm Jim Crockett in Crockett's Victory Garden. I hope you enjoy the program every week.